Let's go back to the second radical reconstruction unless there's questions. This is not on the test Tuesday, just to ensure that we get the whole package in. All right, somebody tell me, what do I mean by this term, second radical reconstruction? If you need to just start reading your notes too, is that would be better than just staring? Maybe. Yes?
An attempt to create a social regime.
Yeah, an attempt to turn America into a socialist society. That marks its direction. The term Reconstruction is harkening back to the Civil War and the Reconstruction afterwards, when the North occupied the South and the constitutions changed, major changes made there. So I'm not trying to say that all those changes were necessarily bad. Banning slavery and some of the things were necessarily bad, but that we do come out of the Civil War very different, and there are some. The federal government does assume too much power in some cases and really put the states under their thumb. Here we get another attempt at remaking America, this time in a socialist form. There's a group of people driving this agenda for this. We looked at a couple of different pieces of this last time. We looked at the activist Supreme Court. Can somebody tell me a court decision that we see during this time frame, or something that we have the courts give us that we dictate to us? Yes.
Miranda rights.
Miranda rights. Roe v. Wade is also there. What were the two problems with all of these decisions? Still the same two problems. I mean, it's the decision that authorized, approved Obamacare, said it was constitutional, the one just that Roberts gave. Really the same problems, especially the first one.
They were all made by the Supreme Court.
Okay, all these things are made by the Supreme Courts, yes. Some of these things would be a very different situation if the state legislatures or Congress had done this, or there was a constitutional amendment, but just the courts to dictate, that's a major problem. Yes. At the end, though, I gave two just general problems about all of these.
They're proposing against the Constitution.
Against the Constitution, nowhere the Constitution doesn't authorize these things are given. They're just recreating things or redefining words. Maybe the second one, or what?
They dictated what the law would be.
Yeah, they went on and dictated what the law should be. Generally, we can talk about that as judicial activism, just in a very broad sense, declaring what the law should be. The courts being very activist. All right, so we talked about the Supreme Court. Then we talked about this assault on American civilization, just everything that had been American, traditional America. And there we looked at the hippies, the rock music, along with the drugs, all of that, and then the student uprising and the black riots, that kind of thing. Then we looked at the revolt against authority, just any type of authority. We're not going to listen there. And then we started into the civil rights movement. All right? And this, there are some legitimate wrongs here, but this movement really gets hijacked and used by these people. There are, I'm going to read some quotes in a little bit by, by some of the leaders, there it is, I'll read you what they're saying, about some of them acknowledging, later on, yeah, we were trying to change America. Really, the civil rights had nothing to do with what we were trying to do. It'd be like you stealing my car because you're going to go rob the bank. Stealing the car was just kind of the vehicle to get to the bank and take the money. Right? And here they hijacked the civil rights movement because they wanted to use it to change America. So it's not to say that all the individual people involved had this mission in mind of changing America, but the leadership definitely did have this in mind. So, all right, first thing we did with this, and the only thing, was mention kind of the broad picture of what happens. What is the problem as we enter the civil rights era, 1954 or so? What is the problem that is coming up here that's stirring up things, especially in the South? Kayla wants to tell us about our problems. Somebody else? He does a very good job of it. It's kind of like a guy from India, like, what's so great about America? It's kind of an outside perspective. Yes?
State laws mandating segregation.
Hey, state laws mandating segregation. You had to have separate eating facilities. We have a light and a dark milk dispenser. Yeah. I didn't realize how bad we are. We also have Sprite and Coke in the pop machine. You know, I'm kind of joking, but there are some people that are so sensitive that they would see racism in something as stupid as that. All right, but it's mandated by the state government. So you had to have 2 different water fountains, different restrooms, different waiting areas for the trains, and that type of mandated by the state government. Okay, and we mentioned that that is really beyond the legitimate role of government. Now, it was not necessarily a violation of the Constitution. All right, the Constitution gives states the freedom to, you know, it's within the realms of the Constitution for state governments to do this type of thing. But it is beyond legitimate, especially as Christians' role of government. It's not their business to be dictating this type of thing. All right, we see then the eventual solution. There's protesting and, you know, sit-ins and all kinds of things happen here, protesting these state laws. Eventually, Congress gets involved, and they pass legislation that makes it illegal to segregate. If you have a restaurant and for some reason you want to only let black people in, just, you know, I was selling candy at a place called Black Brothers Incorporated Company, or CO, or, you know, Black Brothers. And I was kind of laughing at it, that it was started in, you know, 1904 or something. It's not a new company at all, but it was, if you had a company that was just for black brothers. That is now illegal because Congress said so. You know, I mean, if you want to have a company and only allow blacks, or only allow Indians, or only allow whites, or only allow women, it's private property. Have at it. I mean, if you want to start a company for, you know, Peyton's Only, the Peyton's Only restaurant, and only Peyton's can come there. You know, Peyton Manning, Joseph. You have to somehow have Peyton in your name. You know, like Peyton's Palace or something, if you call it. We might think, wow, that's kind of stupid, but it's your private property. You know, do what you want. All right, I think we talked about left-handed blondes last time. Was that a restaurant? I think I might have joked about if they can find the restaurant. Right. But again, I'm not arguing here that it would be right for me to start a restaurant or have a store and say this is only for white people. Okay, as a Christian, that would be wrong. But I also think it's beyond the legitimate role of Congress to dictate that I can't do that. So we follow it's not within their constitutional authority to do that. Okay, it'd be one thing if a state did it, but Congress doing it, it was beyond, stepping beyond what the Constitution allows. This comes through a Republican Congress, and you know we always want to argue, oh, you know, those crazy Democrats are violating the Constitution, but this really is. If you just read the Constitution, it's beyond its legitimate role. Well, we'll maybe talk about some Supreme Court cases that come up. But we can get there in a little bit. So the solution itself is an overstep of what the government should do. In that case, it's an overstep just in general of what the government should do, and also an overstep of the Constitution. It goes beyond the constitutional role of Congress to do this. At least with the state laws initially, it was just they were just bad laws. They were not violations of the Constitution. Right? I was thinking about something the other day, and this came up, and I can't remember now what the example was. Oh, what is it? FUBU is for us, by us, or something like that? FUBU. We started by a black guy, for us, by us. Imagine a white guy doing something like that. It just cuts against the grain. You know, this is only for white people.
White male,
That's
straight
what
pride parade.
What's that?
Straight pride parade.
Straight pride, you know, white power. Anyway, we've been ingrained with the idea that those things sound racist, but really, if somebody wanted to start a company and say we're only selling clothes to Scandinavian immigrants, IKEA, they sell furniture, then that's fine. They can do that, and there's nothing that the government really. It's a private property. Now, if they were going to stand in front of their store and club down, you know, non-Scandinavian women that get close. That just happen to walk. There's a crime committed there. It has nothing to do with the policy of their store. All right, so that's the point again. It's beyond the legitimate role of government. We might look at a store that said that they don't let whites in or they don't let blacks in and say, that's kind of racist. But that is not the government's legitimate job. If, I think you get the point. There are lots of things that we can look around in society and say, I don't really like that. That's not very right. The Bible doesn't agree with that. But the appropriate response is, well, let's have Congress ban it. That's not the right response. Okay, so that's the main issue, kind of the broad picture of what we're going to see here. All right, that was the first point. The second point I've kind of already made, but I want to rehash it. I'll give you some of the, read a quote to you here. But this whole civil rights movement was really hijacked and turned into an attempt to remake America into this communist, socialist nation, depending upon who you look at. But that was part of the agenda. The main leaders of these things, they were not just fighting for equality. They were fighting to change America. This is the way you get to the bank to rob it. That was all that was happening there. Let me give you one example of a leader here that illustrates this at least. A guy named Elbridge Cleaver was a Black Panther member and leader of the party. He was a radical member. He used to argue with other members of the Black Panther Party about not being violent enough. He wanted to be more violent. So he was not like this fringe guy looking at. He was involved with ambushing the police and several nice things like that. So eventually, around 1968, he flees the country because he was, being hunted down as a criminal for shooting police and other things. Flees the country, goes to Cuba, Algeria, France, leaves. Eventually, he comes back to America in 1975 to face these charges. And he made this statement. Again, this is a guy who previously had thought America was racist and ugly and bigoted and needed to change. After going to Cuba and seeing what communism really was, and other places, he got to the point where he said, I would rather be in jail in America than free anywhere else. He kind of opened his eyes. Wait, this socialist dream that we're wanting, really, it's not what we wanted. He also made this statement later on, I was wrong and the Black Panthers were wrong. We, talking about Black Americans, are inside the system. And I feel the number one objective for Black America is to recognize that they have the same equal rights under the Constitution as Ford or Rockefeller, even if we have no blue chip stocks. But our membership in the United States is the supreme blue chip stock, and the one we have to exercise. Just recognize the fact that, no, this is just not blatant racism that's holding us down. We're Americans. We can start a company. We can work hard. We can get an education. And that is the greatest thing we could possibly have. So even there, he realized that this thing was going completely the wrong direction. All right, so it's an attempt to remake America. Let me mention one other thing along that line. We're going to look at the breakup of my notes after this point is the pre-64 era, and then we'll look at what happens in 64 and 65. That's when we get the congressional legislation that fixes all this, makes it illegal to have those state laws and all that kind of stuff. And then after that point is where we see things go crazy. I mean, that's where we get the riots and all kinds of stuff. If the real goal was just to fix these state laws, that was done. All right, it's over. There's nothing left to complain about. All right, and that, to me, that gives us some insight into at least the leadership. They couldn't let it drop at that point because that really wasn't the goal. They wanted to change Americans. All right, so the attempt to remake America as much as anything else. All right, like I said, I've got 3 main points here. We have the pre-64 era. And then the next main point is congressional action. That's what we'll talk about, the things that come through Congress. 64 and 65 is where that happens. And then the last point is after 65. That's when we see the civil rights movement become radical. And we'll look at what happens there. You guys need to ask questions or something, or if we finish this, I'm going to be disappointed that I didn't put it on the test. I could add another essay. All right, pre-64. A couple of general points here. First of all, just a basic strategy that was used lots of different places and lots of different situations. which we very similar strategy to the black riots, but not necessarily exactly the same. So basic strategy. All right, first of all, what will often happen, there'll be some intentional violation of a law. We're going to talk about sit-ins and some other things. There'll be a sandwich restaurant in town, and they would just, a group sometimes of mixed whites and blacks would just march into the white sitting section and all just sit down together and refuse to leave. So just some intentional violation of the law. All right, the second thing would be refusing to cooperate with the police. You know, they go sit down at a restaurant, the owner, you know, what does he do? He's breaking the law if they let them stay. So he calls the police, you know, the police come out, want the people to leave, the people refuse to leave, you know, they lock arms and, you know, hold on to the counter, and they refuse to leave, etc. And that refusing to cooperate with the police, that's when you have the police having to arrest them, having to drag them out of the restaurant, things of that nature. That's the part that the media would cover. They wouldn't cover the other part. They would wait for that. And the protesters knew that. They were waiting. They wanted the police to have to get out their billy clubs. Even if they didn't hit anybody, it just makes a nice picture of them waving their billy club around. They were wanting to stir up that response. All right, so intentionally violate the law. Secondly, just refuse to cooperate, force the police to cuff you and drag you out, that type of thing. All right, third step was refuse to pay fines or etc. so that you had to stay in jail. So we got these people that get arrested for, you know, sitting in the wrong section. They get hauled off to jail. You know, the county sheriff and everybody says, all right, it's $50 fine. You can pay that and go home. They said, no, we're not paying. So now they're stuck in jail. And again, they're playing to the media. They want the media to be able to come and say, look, these people have been in jail for a week because they sat on the white side of the restaurant. And they would just sit there and refuse and allow the media attention to continue to build the case. And then the fourth point is just that, allow the media to support their side. That was the problem, or the basic strategy. All right, let's think here for a little bit. Is this a right way, at least a Christian way, to approach a law we don't like? Matthew's saying no. No. Again, I'm not defending the laws. I think they were wrong and stupid. But if I was a Christian, I could still witness and soul win and do all the other things I should do, even if I couldn't go onto one side or the other. If I had to drink from the white fountain, I could still live as a Christian. Right? There's no direct command in the Bible to drink from the colored water fountain. At least I've not seen it yet. Okay. It's not there. So I mean, as unfair as these things were, we can still obey the government here and obey God. And that's really, we're obligated to do both. So if we can, we should do both. Then does that mean we have to sit around and just say, okay, we can't complain, we can't do anything? Are there other means to address these problems?
Well, you could get together other like-minded people and get a petition, send it to your congressman or whatever.
Petition? You get to vote. you can change the people that are in the city council. I mean, there are other ways to address this thing. All right, and I just want, this is not a Christian approach to it. I'm going to read you a quote here by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And the Reverend fits in as well as O.J. Simpson's glove fit, if you remember that. Troy, you don't remember the trial, but it just doesn't fit. But anyway, it's not a Christian response. And that is it. Not that this, I think the laws were good, but there are other ways. There's a trailer park in Michigan City that says they don't want people walking around passing out literature. Would it be right for me to say, no? If you guys want to give him a minute, you don't have to be so sneaky about it. He's a little juvenile. I hope it's a bench. Okay. Would it be right for me to just walk around the trailer park and say, no, God told me to witness to people. I don't care what you say. Would that be right? That's private property. I mean, no, I can't. I did when they had a public yard sale. You know, I did go to all the yard sales and pass out literature. You know, they invited me at that point. That was different. But no, it wouldn't be right. There are other ways I can try to reach those people. I can mail things to them. I can try to catch them other places. There are other ways. There's bulletin board things where messages can be posted. But if they don't want me to walk around their community, it's private property. I shouldn't do that. So I might not agree with the law, but it doesn't then give me the right to violate it. I'm commanded by God to obey the government and obey Him. And if there's a way to do both, then I should do both. All right. Okay, so not a scriptural response. Let me read you some quotes here from a letter written by King. These are from a letter from the Birmingham City Jail in '63. This is a famous letter he wrote. Now let me just skip to the end of it here. This is in the middle of his letter. He goes on talking about laws and just laws and unjust laws and quoting church fathers, etc. But it gets on to this. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and willingly accepts the penalty by staying in jail to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. Try that, Goody girlfriend and say, I really respect you, that's why I'm going to hit you with this bat. Nice respect for you. All right, it goes on. This really, think about the analogy he's making here. Of course, there's nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. He was in jail there, it wasn't the city buses, I forget what the particular situation was. But a situation like what I just described, where they intentionally violate the law. There's nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was seen sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar. Anybody see a difference? What were they commanded to do?
Worship.
Nod their heads. Worship the idol. Okay, there's no way to obey God and not worship idols, and obey the king and worship idols. At least not in my mind. There's a way to do both. All right, you can't do both. So they chose to obey God. All right, and he's comparing people that follow that basic procedure to them. All right, to me, there's not much of a comparison. It goes on. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and excruciating pain of chopping blocks before submitting to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. He's trying to make the laws in the South, that again we wouldn't agree with, the same as the Roman laws that said you have to go worship Pluto or whoever the Jupiter or whoever the god was for the month, or we're going to execute you. Major, major difference. And I also don't like his wording. The hungry lions and excruciating pain of chopping blocks. I more associate the pain with the hungry lions. The chopping block might be the easy way out, but that's okay. All right, so anyway, that was a basic strategy. That gets used lots of times, lots of different areas, but that's a basic strategy and really not an appropriate Christian response to this type of thing. All right, let me look at a couple of particulars that happened here in this pre-64 era. All right, the first one is in 1955, Montgomery, Alabama. The city buses. The law was that blacks had to sit in the back, whites could sit in the front. And a very famous woman refused to go to the back. Anybody know her name?
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks refused to go to the back. She gets arrested. The whole rigmarole happens. They eventually organize a boycott of the whole system. The blacks refusing to ride this system at all. Martin Luther King, that I just wrote you some quotes from in '63, he becomes prominent in this protesting of the buses there in Montgomery, Alabama. He gets arrested, put in jail, and other things for that. All right, so that's 1955, Rosa Parks. Another one is a general thing that happened multiple times that were called sit-ins. Sit-ins. And this is where typically a group of blacks would enter an area that was designated for whites and just sit down. The white restaurant, the white waiting area at the bus terminal, whatever, just go and sit, refusing to cooperate. They were called sit-ins. There were times there was mixed groups of blacks and whites that would go into an area and just sit down, but typically blacks. There was a couple of groups that organized these types of things. One was called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. If you ever wanted to form a committee, if you have to, in the name of it, declare that you're not violent, there's problems. Okay? You shouldn't have to declare. But anyway, they organized these sit-ins. That coordinated, nonviolent coordinating committee was sometimes referred to as SNCC, S-N-C-C, SNCC. Another one was CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, C-O-R-E. They organized these sit-ins. They get involved in other things, but they also organize these things. Okay, so sit-ins. That happened multiple places, many places around the South. Okay, another thing that happened was called freedom rides. Freedom rides. And this was challenging the segregation of bus terminals. And what happened here is groups of blacks and whites would travel together and just ignore the segregation, designations. If you want it, these were organized by CORE, that Congress on Racial Equality. All right, and then the last thing here in this pre-64 era is August the 28th of 63. There's a march on Washington, about 200,000 or so blacks, and King gives his famous I Have a Dream speech there in Washington. I talked to an older black man once. He's an educated guy, he's actually at Hillsdale College, if you're familiar with that. He was there for a seminar that I was also attending. And he was at this rally, and he said it was the only time he felt like he was really an American. Anywhere else, he just felt like he's this black man on the outside and segregated against it. This is the only time that he felt really like he was part of the system. It was just a very sad comment. I mean, if you think of, what's his name's, Cleaver's, later on, he says, wait a second, we're Americans, we get to vote, we can, what are we complaining about? He's missing so much. Or it's kind of like the man with the muck rake from Pilgrim's Progress who's outside the celestial city complaining about the mud. If you just look up and say, wow, sure I'm standing in the mud, but right there's the celestial city. I'm going to go get it. So, but anyway, that was his march on Washington. Yes?
Do you think that the blacks were treated fairly? I mean...
Oh no, there were definitely, the laws were unfair. I'm not going to argue that at all.
Yeah. I mean, yes, they had their drinking fountains and they had their schooling systems, but the government didn't support them as much as they would the white schools. And so.
Well, that was part of the issue with the ruling of the Supreme Court case that declared the separate but equal facilities were not constitutional. Again, I'm not. There was some racism, and there was they were treated differently. I'm not saying that was right. I think the way they approached it was wrong. The intentionally violent laws, that was wrong. And I think the eventual response was wrong. I mean, if all that really needed to happen was the state governments changed the laws. That would have fixed it all. But again, I don't want to make this sound like there's no wrong done here. There was definitely wrongs done. Definitely. Okay, that was the pre-64 era. Now let's look at congressional action. For me, the kind of the midpoint of this civil rights era, congressional action. We have the pre-64, and then the congressional action. We're going to look at three pieces of legislation. One is actually an amendment to the Constitution, and then two pieces of legislation that are all part of this civil rights thing. All right, the first one is an amendment. It passes in January of 1964. It actually is ratified January of 1964. It made poll taxes illegal. So we can no longer be taxed for having flagpoles. Is that what it means? Got Michael to smile at least. What is this talking about? We should put up more. Why only two? What's it talking about? Poll taxes.
Voting.
Voting, yeah, it's a tax to vote. You have to pay so much to go to the polls. Now this is a stretch, and it's a little bit insulting to blacks, but the argument was it was racist to have a poll tax. Well, they said that the only reason the whites put the poll taxes on was because the blacks were poor, and they knew they couldn't pay it. It was kind of an indirect way to keep blacks from voting. Now just think of this is thought of as sound reasoning that that we need to ban these poll taxes. It really is an insult. Imagine Mr. Armitage coming to you and saying, you lived in England, so we can't really expect you to pay your school bill. We'll give it to you for free. After you get excited, you might think, wait a second. why does it think I'm not capable of paying my school bill? That really, at the end of this thing, that was described as racist to have a poll tax. Now, voting, the whole voting process is expensive. Jacob's going to work there. Wow, you get 115, 120? I forget, it's somewhere in that neighborhood. Every person, there's 4 at each polling place, I believe. 5?
Inspector, 2 judges.
Oh yeah, this is a 2, yeah. So 5 people, each getting about 115, 120, so roughly about $600 just for the people at each precinct. And there's dozens of precincts in Porter County. And then you have all the ballots, you have all the equipment, you have the special machine for people that can't read or can't see, or you have the voting assistant machine. I think my wife says about $5,000. There's one per precinct. Massively expensive. All right, so to me, it's not really outrageous to say, you know, we've got to cover the expenses, you know, $25, $50 if you want to vote. And really, if voting is not that important to you, don't vote. And it's not that important. So anyway, this poll tax was made unconstitutional. We're stuck with it. All right, the next one is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This passes in July of '64. Republican Congress opposed by the Democrats. You wouldn't think that today. But unfortunately, a infamous senator from West Virginia, Robert Byrd, anybody know that name? Sean Hannity used to refer to him as Robert KKK Byrd, because he used to be a Klan recruiter, Democratic senator. Anyway, he filibustered this law for 14 hours, over 14 hours, trying to stop this thing. Democrat, right? I was in D.C. once, and I was taking a tour and went into the Senate chambers, and he was presiding that day in this baby blue suit. And even Rufus Barnett wouldn't wear it, I don't think. It was, ugh. Anyway, it's from my home state of West Virginia. All right. Anyway, it was opposed by the Democrats there in '64. This is what it did, just a kind of a general description of the types of things it did. It forbade or made it illegal to discriminate in public buildings. Illegal to discriminate in public buildings. And by that, we're not talking about, you know, the town hall. We're talking about any restaurant, store, hotel, etc., which is nowhere in the Constitution does Congress have that authority. All right, so it made that illegal. It instituted regulations about federal money not going to institutions that discriminated. So if there was if Olivia had a construction company, you know, we call it like whiteys only or something, she only hired white people, then the federal government would not ever use her company to build anything because she discriminated against black people. You wicked person. But she did compensate. Well, we're all black today. All right, so there's that type of regulation there imposed upon any money spent by the government. It also created the Equal Opportunity Commission, which was a government agency to make sure that people weren't discriminated against when they went to apply for a job. So, anyway, that type of thing. Again, we talked before about how this oversteps the constitutional role of our government, at least. All right, so we have the Civil Rights Act of '64. Now that fixed all the problems. I mean, that alone really fixed all the problems. The issue should have dropped off if that was the goal. All right, the third thing here to mention is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Voting Rights Act of 1965. What this did was create an agency that would go into the South and help blacks register to vote. And again, think of the insult. Imagine, Joseph, you walk down for lunch, and Mrs. O meets you there at the door and says, "Here, let me hold your tray for you. I don't want you to spill your food on your clothes. And let me get you a bib." So I'm a grown man. I can handle this. I can get my own food. But here, you know, well, of course you've got enough of the blacks to vote. We can expect them to be responsible and do it on their own. It is insulting, that mentality. But anyway, Voting Rights Act of 1865 went into the South to just help the registered blacks to vote. All right, so we get that wave of congressional legislation or amendments there coming in 64 and into 65 that really fixed everything. All right, the last phase, after 65. And after 65, the civil rights movement becomes extremely radical. Extremely radical. All right, first point I've kind of already stated, but basically everything had been granted. That was all the protesting, everything had been granted. But the socialist activist leaders continue to push this racist strand and look for other problems and continue to try to riot this thing. Again, they were trying to use this as a method to overturn the system. They wanted the Constitution gone. They wanted a socialist, and that was their goal. So they continued to riot this thing, and then had to look other places and whip up concerns in other places. So anyway, basically everything they granted, but we see the leaders continue to drive this thing. The second thing is in the summers of 64 through 67, there began to be riots in different places around the countries in the black communities. We talked about the black riots before, starting in the summer of 67. There I gave you a general pattern. Some incident would take place, typically a white officer or something arresting a black person, something like that. The event gets exaggerated. People start to protest, start to riot, start to loot, etc. And then the police have to respond to that thing. All right, so that type of thing pops up around the country, lots of different places. First one's in 64. By the time we get to 65, 66, and 67, we see these things becoming crazy. One of the first ones was in 64, is in a place called Watts, Los Angeles. And there the incident was a white policeman arresting a black man for drunk driving. That was the incident. All right, the usual process goes on, the incident gets exaggerated, everybody gets angry and whipped into a frenzy over who knows what exactly, but they get whipped into a frenzy, they start protesting, they start looting, violence. Eventually the National Guard comes out, and by the end of the 6 days, 34 people are killed and about $45 million of property destroyed there in Watts. That was one of the first, and then we have this repeated in over 30 different cities across the country, these types of protests. Detroit was the absolute worst this year. 67, there were 43 people that died. It was described as being like Vietnam, snipers on the buildings and armored vehicles patrolling the streets. I mean, the whole blocks burnt to the ground. It's just...
There was at one point where they hired all the fire departments to come because there were so many black people trying to fight that they would just plow them all over with the fire hoses. And they would just, it was insane.
Yeah.
They had the fire trucks still there on display.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's insane. That's insane. So, all right, so that was 67 the worst. So we have the riots across the country. Those were supposedly to, draw interest to the cause. This really just turned a whole lot of people off. There were a whole lot of people, and we can see it by, laws getting passed in Congress that are very sympathetic to this. Yeah, this is not good. By the time we get through the late 60s, a whole lot of people are saying this is nuts. It just turns people off to the whole thing. So, all right, so we have the riots around the country. The third thing here is the leaders begin to get radical. I'm going to give you some quotes here. We're going to finish this thing. Leaders begin to get radical. King began to make statements like this. It was time to get out and demonstrate and protest until they shook the very foundations of this nation. He began to describe the U.S. government, and this is his words, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. This is the middle of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, but that was his view of America. One of the leaders of the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, said, "Violence is as American as apple pie." this would be the student violent coordinator. American violent, that's the way to get things done. There was a rally in Mississippi. I've heard this basic cadence used lots of places. Hey, hey, what do you know? White folks must go, must go. There's a Black Power rally. Some cadence gets used all kinds of places, but again, just reverse it. Imagine a group of white people. Hey, hey, what do you know? Black folks must go, must go. It doesn't matter what the cause is. The media is saying there's a bunch of racist pigs. But here, oh, no, these people are just, no, it's still racist. All right, Malcolm X, or as Rush Limbaugh calls him, Malcolm the 10th. Malcolm X. Revolution is never based on begging somebody for an integrated cup of coffee. Revolutions are based on bloodshed. Revolutions overturn systems. All right, so we begin to see the leaders here ramping up their rhetoric and becoming extremely radical in the things they push for. Okay, so after 65, we see this civil rights movement becoming radical. That's why I put those dates in our timeline. I was going to say the wheels come off. Maybe the wheels stayed on, but they poured gasoline on the whole vehicle and lit it on fire, and it's going down the street out of control. So it becomes crazy. All right, the very last thing I want to talk about here with the civil rights movement and this whole second radical reconstruction. This is part of the civil rights movement, but I want to talk about some wrong ideas, some bad ideas that we get out of this whole civil rights movement. All right, I've got a list of several here. One is racial quotas. Now there's been some pushback against this, even some court decisions saying that it's racist to base your enrollment on color. We're going to have 30% whites and 20% blacks. Instead of just saying we're going to accept people that meet a certain criteria academically, looking at race. But that comes on this idea of certain racial quotas. And there are corporations and things that are very, very careful to make sure they have a certain number of black people working, and a certain number of women, and a certain number of this and that. They're never concerned about having enough white guys. That's somehow unfair. Because they don't want that accusation made. Oh, you guys are racist. It is funny that people accuse the ownership of the NBA as being racist because it's mostly white people. I would love to see somebody say that the players also are racist because it's mostly black people. That would be fun. See some news commentator that says, yeah, these owners are all racist. Yeah, so are the players. Anyway, but it's accepted. We don't look at them and say, wow, there must be some racial bias against whites. We don't think that. But we do think, wow, there must be some racial bias against blacks in the ownership. And that comes out of this. So, racial quotas. Another one is affirmative action. Again, this has been somewhat, there's been some court rulings and things against this. But the basic idea is that blacks, we need the government to do something affirmative, something positive to help them. They need a helping hand. They've been trodden down and discriminated against so much that we need to help them out. Rather than just make the playing field equal, we want to give them some extra helping hand, affirmative action. All right, the third thing is demanding special rights. I'm black, you can't do that to me, or I'm white, you can't do that to me. Not demanding, just let me be equal. Let me go find my own job and pay my own way. No, I want extra things. A fourth one is the idea of rights being associated with being in a certain class. Instead of, I'm an American, these are my constitutional rights, it's, I'm a woman, you can't treat me that way, or I'm a black man, you can't treat me that way, or that time. We start to think about classes of people instead of we're Americans. There's kind of a funny idea that comes up sometimes with this class, right? It's the idea of reparations, the idea that somehow there should be some payment made from white people to black people because of slavery. I kind of agree with the idea. I think that anybody who would own slaves should pay his slave something. They're all dead. They're all gone. There's no white person today that owns a slave that needs to repay them. So there's some ideas like that. We're blacks. We need the government to give us some special money. because of reparations. But anyway, that idea, classes of people, and they get treated a certain way because they're in that class. So, all right, fifth one is oversensitivity to supposed wrongs. Oversensitivity. We've seen this other places. You know, you come up to a kid in junior church and put your hand on their shoulder. Don't touch me. You know, my dad. And, you know, probably safer not to do that. But if I was using an illustration in junior church, I talked about a black man. I forget exactly. It was just part of the story. It was a black man, and someone said, "Oh, racist." Black. That really is just an observation. It's not racist, but we've been ingrained with that. Oh, he said black man, he must be racist. No, it was just this hypersensitivity to wrongs is not there. I mean, I talked to a guy once in Gary years ago. He was an adult, 25 or so, and he was explaining to me that nobody would hire him because he was black. So we started talking about it. And he'd go to his interview with his pants sagged down, his hair all disheveled, a dirty shirt on, hadn't shaved for several days, just this complete wreck. He just wanted to work at McDonald's or something, and they don't hire him. And he just goes, "Oh, it's because I'm black." Can't possibly think there might be some other explanation. You know, graduate from high school, shave, get clothes on, you know, some of those things help significantly. So this oversensitivity. All right, two more. The sixth one is further erosion of state rights. We see the federal government, the national government here, further encroaching into the rights that the state should have. Again, enough stuff. And then the last one, just kind of a general idea, is that we begin to accept the idea that the government should force somebody else to do something we want them to do. Here, the blacks thought that they wanted to sit at the white counter, so they wanted the government to come in and force it. Today, people think certain areas should be reserved as natural habitat, for whatever particular animal they love that week. That's fine, buy it. But what we do now is we go to the government and have the government say that, "Oh no, you can't build on that. It's a wetland," or whatever. We get that idea that if I want my neighbor to do something, I'm going to get the government to force him to do it. Right? That whole thing is convoluted. All right, civil rights movement, radical reconstruction. Questions? 2 minutes is good. We can start as a Truman. See you next time.